Welcome to the Listening Time Podcast. Hey everybody, this is Connor, and you're listening to episode 132 of the Listening Time Podcast. Thank you all for listening. I hope that your English learning is going great. I hope that you feel motivated to continue on with your listening practice and keep on doing what you're doing and just trust that you're improving, even if the process seems slow. I want to encourage you to keep on going, and thank you for listening and using this podcast as one of your tools to help you with your English. Today, I'm going to talk about a really interesting topic that I think is relevant to every single one of us. The topic is introverts and extroverts. You've probably heard these words before, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about these things in just a minute. But the topic of introverts and extroverts is really interesting because it's related to us, our personality, how we interact with other people, how we feel about ourselves and our environments. Depending on if you're an introvert or an extrovert, this has a lot of influence over your life. So I think this is a very important topic to talk about. And so I'm excited for this one today. Before we get started, remember to sign up for my US Conversations podcast if you feel ready to start practicing with real conversations so that you can take your listening to the next level. The link is down below. That's patreon.com/US Conversations. And if you want my specialized training to help you listen better and pronounce better, and if you want my advanced podcast episodes, then make sure to check out my membership, and you can become a Listening Time family member if you want those advanced episodes in particular. The link is also down below. That's patreon.com/listeningtime. And if you like this podcast, please share it. Please send it to your friends or your family members who might benefit from it. And please give it a 5-star rating and write a review if you can. All right, let's get started. Are your ears ready? You know what time it is. It's listening time. Okay, let's talk about introverts and extroverts. We're also going to talk about one other type of person, an ambivert. We'll get into that later. But most people are just familiar with introverts and extroverts, these two ends of the spectrum. Remember that when we talk about the ends of a spectrum, we're talking about the two opposite extremes on some scale, right? So on one end, we have introverts, and on the other end, we have extroverts. So what is an introvert? Well, an introvert has many characteristics, and extroverts do as well. So let me talk about some of them. An introvert is usually characterized as being someone who is generally quiet and reserved. You don't have to be extremely quiet or extremely reserved, but in general, you're more quiet and reserved than an extrovert, let's say. And when people think of introverts, they usually think of people that can be a little bit shy around people they don't know, around strangers. The word strangers just refers to people that you're not familiar with, people you don't know. These are strangers. So introverts are often a little shy or maybe really shy around strangers, and they can be shy in group settings. So if there are a lot of people and you're all talking together, if you're an introvert, you might find it hard to speak up and be the center of attention and control the conversation. That might be hard for you if you're an introvert and you're in a group setting. So if you're an introvert, you tend to be a little bit more quiet or reserved or shy, especially around people you don't know or in large groups. However, if you're around people that you do know and people you feel comfortable with, then you're probably not the same as if you were with a group of strangers, let's say. You're probably going to seem a lot more social, less shy, less reserved around people that you do know. So in general, introverts can be quiet and reserved. However, that's more around people and in situations that are unfamiliar to them, right? If you're an introvert, that doesn't mean you're always quiet and reserved, right? I want to differentiate there. Another characteristic of introverts, and I think that this is the biggest one or one of the biggest ones, is that introverts tend to feel drained by social situations. When we say that you're drained by something, this means that your energy is taken away. It decreases. It is depleted. It is drained. So introverts tend to feel drained by social situations. So after a social situation, you might feel exhausted and you might feel like you need some alone time. You want to just go home and be by yourself for a while. That's a really common characteristic of an introvert. So that's one of the biggest ones. You tend not to feel super energized and recharged from social situations. It's the opposite. You feel like you're drained and you need some alone time afterwards. That doesn't mean that you just don't like social situations. That's not always the case, but you just feel exhausted from those situations. And you actually get energized in solitude. Solitude just refers to being alone. So being alone actually energizes you if you're an introvert. You feel like you're regaining your energy. You feel like your battery is being charged again. That's another characteristic of introverts. And another trait that introverts might have is that they tend to process a lot of thoughts in their head rather than say things out loud all the time. By the way, the word trait just means characteristic or quality. So introverts have this trait often where they think things through in their head. They're very thoughtful. They process a lot of thoughts in their mind. They don't think out loud, as we might say, where they're just talking and saying what comes to their mind right away. And they tend to be analytical in that way, that they think through things silently without necessarily talking. So that's another trait. And one other trait of introverts, which can definitely be a weakness sometimes is that introverts often avoid confrontation. Introverts often have a hard time confronting people when they need to. I'm sure a lot of you can identify with this feeling that when you have to confront someone in maybe an uncomfortable situation, you dread this. When someone dreads something, this means that they anticipate something with fear and negativity. So I'm sure some of you feel this dread when you have to confront someone and talk to them about something that's uncomfortable or something that isn't right or whatever. It can be hard for introverts to do this. So that one can be a weakness because there are many times when we need to confront people. And so that's going to cause some pain, some anxiety for introverts when those situations arise. So that's another characteristic. And how about extroverts? Let's talk about extroverts now. So extroverts are generally described as being outgoing. So when you're outgoing, this means that you're someone who naturally talks and engages people and is able to produce conversation and talk to people and be social in a natural way. So extroverts tend to be like this. Extroverts usually enjoy social settings and they thrive in social settings. When you thrive, we're saying that you do really well, you succeed or excel in some area. So extroverts thrive in social settings usually, and extroverts actually enjoy having this attention of being in a group, being around other people, and actually having the attention on them. I'm sure if you're an introvert, that sounds crazy to you, right? Because you probably don't like having the attention on you. You don't like being the center of attention in a group of people. However, extroverts often have no problem with this. Extroverts can feel confident in talking and being the center of attention, and they aren't constantly feeling self-conscious about themselves and what they're saying. Extroverts can thrive a lot more in group settings and being in the spotlight. Being in the spotlight means that you are the center of attention. So extroverts don't mind being in the spotlight sometimes. So that's a big difference from introverts, of course. And contrary to introverts, extroverts can actually feel energized in social situations. They actually feel like they're getting energy when they're around other people and talking and engaging, maybe even complete strangers, who knows? But they can feel energized by this, and they don't go home afterwards and say, oh man, that was so hard. I need to go and be by myself for 5 hours, right? They probably don't feel like that. They feel that they have been recharged and energized from that social situation. So extroverts don't need as much solitude. Extroverts don't need to be alone as much. And that can sometimes be a disadvantage of being an extrovert, is that sometimes extroverts have trouble being alone. It might be hard for them to be in solitude, and they might feel bad or anxious when they spend more time alone. So that can sometimes be a negative. Not all extroverts feel like that, but some do. And so that's something to be aware of as well. And extroverts can often have many friends. They might have a very large circle of friends, and they don't feel anxious about the fact that they have such a big, thriving social life. It's natural for them. And extroverts are often more assertive. So they're not as afraid of confrontation as introverts are. So extroverts can be more assertive and actually be more comfortable saying what they need to say, confronting other people, talking about that uncomfortable topic, and just confrontation in general. Extroverts tend to be more comfortable with that. So that can be a big advantage of being an extrovert, because you don't have that same anxiety when it comes to confrontation. And one other trait of extroverts that is sometimes true, not always, but this can sometimes be a weakness, is that sometimes certain extroverts might be more easily distracted. So remember how I talked about introverts being a little bit more quiet and analytical in their thought process? Introverts often learn through observation and are very thoughtful and spend a lot of time processing thoughts in their head. Extroverts can do that too, but there's also a tendency for some extroverts to be more distracted, maybe less focused, and spend less time in careful observation, in thoughtful observation. So they might be more distracted in certain situations and might not spend as much time just observing one thing and thinking and processing one idea. They might go from one to the next, right? So you might disagree with that if you're an extrovert, because you might not have that trait. But when I was doing some research online, that was one of the traits that came up, was that extroverts can sometimes be like that. So that might be a negative for some extroverts. And how about the last category, ambiverts? So I talked about introverts and extroverts being on the opposite ends of the spectrum, but there are also ambiverts, which would kind of be like in the middle. So not completely introverted and not completely extroverted. They're kind of in the middle. And I think a lot of people fall in this category here. A lot of you are probably ambiverts to some degree. And some people might make the argument that all of us have extrovert and introvert traits, but some of us are more extroverted and some of us are more introverted. So that might be valid as well. But I want to talk about the category of ambiverts, just to talk about the middle ground here, the middle of the scale, because in general, for me, if someone were to ask me, are you an introvert or an extrovert? I would 100% say introvert. I'm definitely more of an introvert than an extrovert. However, if I want to be a little bit more specific, I would say that I'm more of an ambivert. I would say that I'm more of a social introvert. That's kind of the phrase that I prefer, because I'm definitely not an extrovert in general. I'm definitely more of an introvert. However, I'm an introvert that can at times seem like an extrovert. And I think that this is the key here when I talk about being an ambivert or a social introvert, is that in certain situations, we can actually seem like extroverts. So if the context is right, we can start to display a lot of extrovert tendencies and qualities. But in other situations, we're just classic introverts. So I'm sure some of you might be able to identify with that in general, you're an introvert. However, there are certain situations where you suddenly change and it's like you're an extrovert. So depending on the context, the environment, your mood, the topic that people are talking about, who is around you, depending on these factors, you might suddenly seem like a complete extrovert, and then afterwards go back to being an introvert. So that's kind of how I feel. There are certain situations in which I feel like I want to have more attention. I want to talk. I want to engage people. I feel outgoing. I feel energized. I want to be around these particular people in this situation. Sometimes I actually feel like that. But in general, that's not my natural feeling. In general, I don't want to be the center of attention. I'm not the most outgoing person. I really enjoy solitude. I really enjoy being by myself. I can be by myself for hours or days nonstop and feel great. So obviously, I'm an introvert because an extrovert wouldn't say that. However, in certain situations, it's like someone flips a switch and then I'm an extrovert. When we say that someone flips a switch, think of someone turning a light on. They're flipping the light switch and suddenly it's light. So this is a figurative expression that we use to talk about something changing in an instant. So sometimes it's like someone flipped a switch and I'm suddenly an extrovert. However, even in those situations, after the situation is over, after I go home, let's say, I feel drained. So even when I act and feel like an extrovert, afterwards, I want my solitude. I want to be alone. So as you can see, I'm not an extrovert, but I'm a social introvert. I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy conversation. I enjoy social contexts. However, in these contexts, I often feel more reserved. I feel drained. I don't want to be the center of attention. So I'm more introverted in that sense. And what's the best thing to be? Is it best to be an introvert, an extrovert, an ambivert? Well, there's no best thing, of course. This is just our personality. However, I think it's best for us to understand and identify what type of person we are, and then focus on the possible weaknesses that we might have because we're an introvert, or because we're an extrovert, or because we're an ambivert. Focus on the weaknesses, the things that can be difficult for us, and try to train in those areas, because you can get better at certain things. If you're an introvert, you can train yourself and get better in social settings. You can do that. And if you're an extrovert, you can train yourself to enjoy solitude more. So you can get better in these areas. So in summary, I think that there's no best type, but we should all focus on improving our weaknesses in these areas. All right. I hope this episode was interesting for you and it was good practice for your listening. If you feel ready, I encourage you to sign up for my US Conversations podcast so you can practice with real conversations and actually understand multiple people when they're talking to each other. That's a really important step in your language learning process, to be able to understand multiple native speakers talking with each other. So go down and click on the link below to sign up. That's patreon.com/US Conversations. And if you want my training to help you become a better listener and to pronounce better, then make sure to sign up for my membership. The link is also down below. And if you like this podcast, please share it with anyone else you know who's learning English, and give it a 5-star rating and write a review. All right. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I'll talk to you on the next episode of Listening Time.